A warm welcome for this webinar today. My name is Marcio Galeato. I'm the co-director of MHPSS.net, and we are very happy to have you here for this third webinar on a series of webinars we have been running here at MHPSS.net, titled This Much I Know. Practitioners reflect on community-based MHPSS. This series consists of conversations with MHPSS experts about what they have learned from their very real concrete experience in implementing community-based approach to mental health and psychosocial support. And today, our third conversation will be with David Lemon, hosted by our dear friend Michael Wessel as well. It's important to note that this series is part of a project at MHPSS.net called MHPSS Design Lab. It's a project led by MHPSS.net in collaboration with TPO Nepal and supported by GIZ, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and UNICEF. Design Lab, for quick introduction, it's a methodology for building capacity and supporting organizations to co-create community-based MHPSS interventions with crisis-affected people that are tailored to their specific needs and context. So this webinar, I'm going to pass now to my colleague Michael Wesson, who is a professor at Columbia University. It's a name very well known in our field, given his large contribution to what we call today the mental health and psychosocial support sector. And the webinar will last for about 1 hour. Feel free to make questions during the webinar at the chat. So you put the questions as they come, questions or comments. And at the end of the conversation, I will be giving them back to the presenters today. Dear Mike, over to you.
Thanks so much, Marcio, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to have a conversation today with David Lemon from Sierra Leone. I wanted to start first by saying just a couple of words about the rich interconnections between community-based child protection and community-based psychosocial support. You know, to me, these are like two interwoven strands. Because this is a series on community-based psychosocial support, I think it's important to recognize that child protection is really a fundamental part of this. One way to look at it is that we shouldn't wait for the harms to children and to people to arise, requiring MHPSS support. Another way of looking at it, coming the other direction, is that if people engage in MHPSS, have good relationships, are not isolated, have agency and find meaning in life, they're more likely to be able to collectively organize themselves and to prevent the risks and the harms to children. You know, we hear again and again amongst people who live in zones of armed conflict that it's the stresses associated with living in those conflict settings that really damage and harm their overall well-being. So these are just some of the rich interconnections, and in the spirit of cross-fertilization, we're going to be looking at community-led child protection. It's my great honor to be able to introduce David Lemon, who is a longtime mentor, colleague, and friend from Sierra Leone. David is a child protection specialist with UNICEF in Sierra Leone, and he has very extensive experience working on community-based mechanisms and helping them align with and connect with the formal structures within the government. He also works with government and civil society on a variety of issues of child protection system strengthening, the legal and policy frameworks, prevention and response mechanisms, information management, social services, workforce strengthening, and coordination. David, it's a real pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's good to be with you and with all of these other people who are part of this very important network. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So maybe just to begin our discussion, David, I'd like to ask you how would you go about describing community-led child protection to someone who's not a specialist, maybe just someone on the street? If you had to give a quick answer, what would it be? Thank you.
A quick answer, I'll say it's an approach that promotes community power, community dialogue, and community decision-making. You know, a lot of the problems that children face are problems that result from our behavior and attitudes to children and from, you know, the traditions and customs of bringing them up. So if we want to address children's issues, we have to do it within the context of those traditions and customs. We have to do it by understanding how our behavior and our attitudes affect children. And the best way to do this is to do it with the people themselves who, you know, exhibit those different behaviors and attitudes. And so community-led child protection is simply putting the community first, giving them the power so that they lead in the decision-making and in supporting interventions that will address children's issues.
Thank you, David. That's a very succinct and elegant answer. I wonder if you could give us an example from your own experience of community-led child protection. And as you described the example, I wonder if you could say just a few words about the process of community-led child protection and also the outcomes, both for protection and for psychosocial well-being. Thanks.
It is difficult to decide which example to give, so I'll try to give 2 or 3 examples from different contexts. Now, in the early 2000s, when the war in Sierra Leone concluded and the peace agreement was signed, one of the elements of that peace agreement was to support the reintegration of child soldiers. The biggest question in the mind of everyone was, you know, how can you talk about reintegration of child soldiers, considering their experience, considering what they had learned during the war, and considering the bad things that they had perpetuated during the war. We went to the communities and said, you know, how should we make this happen? How can we make it happen? When things like this happen, how do you as a community recover from it? How do you heal from it? How do you accept the people who had been perpetrators? And then the communities told us about the healing and cleansing mechanisms that they have. Those were the strategies we used. We adopted those healing and cleansing mechanisms. We supported them. And I can say with all pride that we were able not only to reunify children, but to support their reintegration within those communities. A longitudinal study that had been conducted you know, over the years had seen that the children who were taken back to their communities continued developing. They went to school, they were stronger, they showed more leadership abilities, they were more active in community activities. And, you know, Sierra Leone has been able to show a very big progress and success in the rehabilitation and reintegration of child soldiers. In Sri Lanka, after the tsunami, I was in Trincomalee, you know, and there was a lot of interest on how to support people who had suffered from the tsunami of 2005 in Southeast Asia. I spoke to the people of Trincomalee and I asked them this simple question. When things like this happen, when you lose people, How do you heal? How do you recover? And what support do you want from us to help you move beyond the effects of the tsunami? And they said, what we want to do is bury our dead, in the respectful way, in the way that we do it. And that will give us a lot of peace of mind. That is the first step. That is the foundation. And if we are able to do this, we believe we can move beyond the tsunami. And we supported this. And it was easy for them to be able to move beyond the tsunami because they had done what they considered to be the most important traditional values that they had. And it helped the children as well to recover and to continue their education afterwards. In Sierra Leone, again, we spoke with communities around child protection issues. We did a lot of learning. Communities identified the serious issues affecting children. They identified teenage pregnancy as one of the most serious issues affecting children. We said, okay, you have identified teenage pregnancy, so what do you want to do about it, and how do you want to go about addressing the issue of teenage pregnancy? The communities organized themselves. They set up a task force. They developed action plans on how they wanted to go about this. They assigned roles to different people in the communities. They followed up with the formal system and requested from government someone who would, raise awareness or provide training on sexual and reproductive health, on the use of contraceptives, someone who would work with teenagers and help, improve their life skills. All of this came from communities. And when we supported these initiatives, we saw a reduction in teenage pregnancy. We saw an improvement in children's life skills and decision-making. And the children themselves from one community came up with a slogan. It was 5910. That is the most powerful communication message I have ever heard and seen. And 5910 simply means 5 minutes of enjoyment, 9 months of pregnancy, 1 child, and 0 future. And when children in that community say 5910, every child understands, and then they know what to do. But for the first time, the people were able to hold government accountable. For the first time, the people were able to ask government, this is what we want, to support the protection of our children. So this is what it simply means, and I can give these 3 examples of how it is extremely important to engage with communities and find out how they want to address the issues of children, what they want to do, building on practices that they already know and practices that already exist.
Thanks, David, for those rich examples from very different contexts. It sounds like in this process that there's a lot of community ownership because they're in the driver's seat, they're making the decisions. And I wondered if you could just say a few words about how community ownership affects the impact on children and also the sustainability of positive outcomes for children. Thanks.
When there is no community ownership, all interventions and efforts to address protection issues are seen as foreign. They are seen as the responsibility of NGOs or the responsibility of government. And when this happens, communities do not invest. Communities do not hold themselves accountable, because they think this is an outside intervention and the responsibility stays outside. When there is ownership, the communities see the intervention as their own. They hold themselves accountable. They invest their resources, human and otherwise, and they use what is available within the communities to address children's problems. And it doesn't end there. They start talking about it. They start raising awareness. And as a community, they make decisions that help in behavior change, or decisions that may help in changing some of the traditional practices which impact children's lives negatively. Once there is community ownership, there is sustainability because the accountability then rests with the community. And so they see that whatever good practice has been put in place is something that they need to sustain. In all of the interventions where communities have taken responsibility, we have seen those interventions being sustained, and we have seen those interventions being expanded to address other child protection issues. In interventions where there is no community ownership, as soon as the NGO pulls out, or as soon as the government agency pulls out, those interventions collapse because the community is not willing to take them forward. They are not willing to invest. And so those interventions die out very quickly.
Thanks, David. That's a very powerful statement about the importance of community ownership. Thank you for that. You've been involved now in community-led approaches in quite a number of different communities. And I'm wondering, how do community people themselves see this approach? I mean, they see NGO projects, many of them have experienced that, and now more communities are experiencing this community-led process. How do they view it? Thanks.
I think I can use 2 words to express how communities feel about this process. One is appreciation, 2 is respect. Communities appreciate that they are considered, they appreciate that they are engaged, they feel respected, that people understand that they have a problem that they want to solve, that they are not just bystanders, but that they are part of the problem and they are part of the solution. And because of this feeling of respect and because of this feeling of appreciation, they are able to engage appropriately, they are able to ask the questions, but more importantly, they become open enough and they discuss things that are otherwise considered as taboos. In Sierra Leone, there are many child protection issues which were not widely discussed before. The issue of FGM, the issues of disability, you would not find people talking about them before. But through community-led approaches, communities have understood that if they are to address the issues of their children and support their children to develop to according to the visions that they have for them, then they had to talk about these issues and understand how these issues affect children's development. And so because they feel respected and because they appreciate the engagement, they become more open, they become more transparent, and they become more supportive to interventions to address children's issues.
Thanks, David. These processes of respect and trust are sometimes in short supply, so it's very encouraging to hear what you're saying. And in humanitarian settings, I think they're absolutely crucial for dignity, which is one of the most important things we need to be supporting in humanitarian settings. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to ask a question about the scalability of community-led child protection. I've heard some people criticize the process, saying that it really cannot be taken to scale because it's inherently a local process. And yet you, UNICEF, the government of Sierra Leone, and quite a number of NGOs have been involved and actually working to scale up the use of community-led approaches to child protection. So what's your view? Is it scalable, and what are the challenges to scaling up? Thanks.
Yes, it is scalable. We cannot strengthen national protection systems if we do not have a strong community-based or informal part of that system. And the community-based or informal part of that system has to be linked to the formal system. Without this, there is no way we can realistically strengthen a national child protection system. In Sierra Leone, we started with 6 communities in 2 districts, 3 communities in 1 district, 3 in another district. Today, we have expanded or scaled up to 6 districts with more than 60 communities, and with governments and civil society partners. Now, the first challenge I can talk about is the understanding of community-led child protection. Many people do not understand the approach very well. And so it is easy to think that it is a difficult approach because it requires careful understanding, it requires learning, it requires a change in our mentality where we recognize community people as the drivers of change for children instead of us as drivers of change for children. It's an approach that requires us to accept communities as partners instead of seeing them as beneficiaries, that we can just hand out activities or resources to. So there has to be this understanding, and when this understanding is not there, it becomes difficult for people who would make decisions for scaling up, to stall on these decisions. Another challenge, comes from the fact that we live in a fast-moving world where we want to achieve results very quickly, and we also support or implement very short-term interventions or projects. Community-led child protection requires patience, it requires time, it requires a careful engagement, it requires learning, and then taking action based on the learning. Now, when we do not have the time and when we do not have the patience, and when the donors themselves do not understand this approach, it becomes difficult because the resources to support the scale up may not be available. It also requires a lot of coordination between and among agencies and agreements among the different players, to adopt the approach, but to support each other as well, building capacities as we move along. These are some of the challenges that affect scaling up, but the biggest challenge is the lack of time that we normally have because of how we design our projects and our interventions. And one of the challenges we have been discussing and fighting with in UNICEF is the fact that, to be able to develop strong interventions for children, we need to have the process, we need to start the process from the community level coming up instead of using a top-down approach where we design and then we take to communities for discussions. It has to be the other way around, where the discussion starts from the community and the finalization within the office itself.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to add that from my side, one of the challenges too, it goes back to what you said about a different mentality, and it relates to humility. If outsiders describe themselves as experts, we kind of put ourselves up on a pedestal and talk down to people. But if we work in a humbler way where we realize all that we don't know, and like you say, we respect people's knowledge and ways of doing things, then we get farther. These are not included in a lot of training curricula, I'll just note.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this brings up a question then about preparation. Community-led child protection does require good facilitation, at least in the early days. And you've been a real leader in terms of helping to identify how this can occur. So I wonder if you could describe what qualities do you look for in a facilitator? And then what needs to be done to help capacitate or train and prepare the facilitator? And I mean, is it a single training or is there some other process? Thanks.
Selection of facilitators to work at community level is very important and will determine to a very large extent the outcome of the intervention, whether it is successful or not. Facilitators have to be very humble people. people who are able to respect people who do not consider themselves to be the experts, people who do not look at their qualifications and think, that just because someone is in the community or just because someone has not attained that same level of education or qualification does not know about children. Parents, community members know more about children because it's their children. They have lived with them, for years. They know what to do. They understand them. They support them. So it is important that the facilitators understand this and they are able to be respectful and should not see themselves as, the authorities coming to work with communities. Facilitators should understand their limitations, either in terms of knowledge around certain protection issues, limitations in their advocacy skills, and other limitations, that may affect the work that they do. And understanding these limitations mean that they should appreciate the resources that exist and should be able to work with these resources. And they should forge strong partnerships at the community level to be able to address children's issues. A facilitator should also be very empathetic. If you do not understand what people are going through, it is difficult to understand, the issues that they face. It is difficult to understand the decisions that they make. And it is difficult to understand how to partner with them to address the problems that they have. Problem solving comes from the person who has the problem. And as a facilitator, if you do not understand, if you do not feel, then it becomes difficult to come up with solutions that may work for this person. Sometimes we develop these one-size-fits-all, solutions which do not work because a lot of the issues are different. And so the facilitator should be empathetic. They should be able to put themselves in the shoes of community people so that they understand what they go through, because it's the only way they can appreciate the problems that they face and be able to support them. Facilitators should be able to reflect regularly on how they work, how their work impacts people. They should ask themselves, how is my engagement being seen? Do people understand when I talk to them? Do people appreciate the approach that I use? Do people think I respect them enough? Do people find me valuable? How did I do the things that I did today? How did I conduct the meetings? Did I give space to everyone to speak? Did I allow the meeting to be dominated by one person? And if they are able to reflect on their activities, on their approaches, they will understand mistakes that may have been made and then address those mistakes. They will be able to understand, what they had not done rightly and be able to improve on them. They will be able to understand how they impact the community generally, and then try to address issues that may arise from their engagement with that community. So a facilitator is someone who should be able to reflect on what they do. A facilitator should also strive to promote inclusion. A lot of times, and in many places where I have worked, I have seen that people who work with communities have fixed ideas of who to work with. Usually it's the community stakeholders, the authorities, the religious leaders, the influential men and women, But we know that without inclusion, you are not talking about a community. So a facilitator is someone who should value, the principle of inclusion and ensure that in their work, they are able to promote inclusion at all levels. Men, women, children, adults, different shades of opinion, people who are disabled, people who are marginalized, because sometimes there are people who do not have a voice. In some of the villages where I have worked, there are people who leave the village at 5 a.m. in the morning, they go to their farms, with their children. They can only come back at 7 to 8 p.m. Those are the families whose children do not benefit from health services. Those are the families whose children do not attend school. Those are the families whose children do not take part in recreational activities and other activities that are meant for children. If you do not include such people in planning and decision-making, you are missing the point, and you are missing reaching out to all of the children. Because they understand the problem and the problem affects them, it is important to have their voice in whatever decision is being made. So a facilitator has to understand the principle of inclusion and promotes that principle of inclusion. Then there is the issue of flexibility. We cannot be very rigid in our approach at community level. So facilitators have to be very flexible people. They have to understand that sometimes they work beyond hours that they have set for themselves. Sometimes they have to employ different modalities. As I said earlier, some people spend very little time. They go out. You have to be able to reach those people. You cannot use one method like a meeting to talk to communities, and you have to employ different methods. So the facilitator has to be a very flexible person. I think those are some of the qualities of the facilitator I will look at. Now, it is important to prepare facilitators before placing them in communities. Training is important on the approaches of community-led child protection, but it is also more important to, help them build a relationship with the communities that they are going to work in. So before they start work, it is important to introduce them, to different stakeholders, to different decision makers at whatever political structures that are set. It is important to expose them to women, to expose them to children, to help them understand the communities that they are going to work in, so that when they start the process of facilitation, they understand the power dynamics, they know the people to engage, they know the people who are deprived, who are marginalized, who do not have a voice, so that they are able to include and bring them into the process. A one-off training will not work for facilitators. It is important to provide series of training, coaching, supportive supervision, create a space for them to feedback on their experiences. So you see the challenges that they face, and you discuss how to address these challenges. It is important to share ideas from different places that they can learn from and bring to the work that they do.
Wow, thank you, David. I wanted to mention to everyone that there are training tools based on the incredible learning from Sierra Leone that are available on the website community-ledcp.org. No dashes, no nothing, just community-ledcp.org. And so if you're interested, you can find some useful resources there. And David, just one last question before we open up for discussion. You're working with different agencies to take on community-led child protection. And yet you've said that there are these various challenges to it. What do you see as enablers or as limiters regarding an agency's ability to use community-led child protection successfully? Thanks.
Let me start with the factors that limit community ownership and undermine a community-led child protection intervention. Sometimes we start by introducing money in the work that we do. Once you introduce money, the community thinks, oh, there's money sitting somewhere and someone has this responsibility, and we cannot do anything without the introduction of money. There was a time in Sierra Leone when the child was considered to be the responsibility of the community. And when the child loses parents, the community will come together, they will identify carers for the child. So the child, is not faced with the challenge of not having someone to care for them. When we started introducing money, when we started creating orphanages, and when we started paying caregivers to care for children, we undermine this community practice, which is a way of bringing up our children. So when we introduce money into the work that we do, we erode and we undermine the responsibility of parents and the responsibility of communities. Now, as I said earlier, we sometimes design our interventions in the office, one size fits all, and we take these interventions to the different communities. It becomes very difficult because communities are different, the issues are different, or the understanding and approach to the issues can be different. If we design our interventions in the office and there is not enough consultation with the communities, there's no learning from the communities, it becomes extremely difficult to implement these interventions. I will give an example in the area of child rights. When you talk to communities in Sierra Leone and you ask about the issues that affect children, community members will tell you child rights. How can child rights be a problem to children's development when child rights, is the minimum standards to help children realize their fullest potential? It is because we come to communities and we say, oh, there was this committee that was set up at global level and they came up with this instrument which should be applied everywhere. And people think, okay, so this is an external intervention and you're now telling us how to bring up our children. The reality is, when you ask community people, what do you need, or what should be in place, or what should be done to help children develop and realize their fullest potential, they will quote every element of child rights, all the elements in the children's rights. That is what they will quote to you. But because of the way we communicate child rights, because of the way we present it, and because we present it as something from the UN, something from the global level, people easily think, oh, this is something from outside, without even discussing and understanding what rights are about. There are strong elements of children's rights within every culture. And when you start talking about child rights within the context of those cultures, looking at those practices that promote children's rights and why those practices are in place, then people understand what you're talking about and they can build on existing practices instead of presenting things as if, they are foreign and they came from people who know, and give people the impression that they at community level do not know, and so they have to be taught about what children's rights are. Also, we sometimes do not build on resources within the communities. There are resources in every community that can be enlisted to support actions to promote children's rights. There are mechanisms that map out how child protection issues are addressed. There are people within communities who have traditional roles, of addressing protection issues. In Sierra Leone, for example, in every community, there is an elder who is respected, who is listened to. And when you bring this elder, they can mediate, they can negotiate, they can help to make recommendations, and people respect this mechanism. What is important is working with such people, and helping them work together so that they can identify protection issues and address them in ways that do not put children at more harm, but in ways that will help the children recover. Now, what are some of the factors that will enhance community ownership? Of course, working with community people, learning from them, understanding what they know about children's issues, helping them to identify protection issues, and working with them to address these protection issues. It is using the resources at community level by not introducing money in the very beginning, but start from what they have, start from what they know, and build upon it. It is creating linkage between the community mechanisms and the formal systems so that we can enrich and enhance the national child protection systems, developing referral mechanisms where protection issues can be referred from community to the formal systems, for their response and vice versa. It's also learning from communities in a respectful way. It is understanding how they do things, and it is helping them take the leadership in the child rights interventions.
Thanks so much, David. Your attention to communities' remarkable abilities as problem solvers, the importance of building on their values and their resources. All of these are such tremendously important and valuable lessons. Thank you. So I think we should now turn to a very interesting part of our session, which is Q&A. So Marcio, are you going to guide us and bring forward some of the questions? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike and David. It feels like it has been just 5 minutes of so much and so fast that important conversations going on. We have a number of reactions here at the chat. There is one from Lynette and Caroline that are very similar, where they are sharing how important, how it struck them when David mentioned about it's always time to engage with community, and the interventions should always start from discussions with the community, helping to make sure that community feel consulted, engaged, and participating. So thanks, Lynette and Caroline, for your contribution. And we have here, I would say, I will start with 2 hot questions from Deepali. I say hot questions because they're kind of a bit challenging in a way that she's asking recommendations related to power dynamics between the different groups in the community level. How can we navigate then and to make sure that the community-led work, the community engagement, don't reinforce contradictions, power dynamics, marginalization inside of the community? This is one question from her, and it's followed by a second question, which I will pose here now for the 2 of you, which is also something I call as a big question related to when the culture is not right, in a way that when working with traditional practice that may be causing harm to the community, how to navigate that as well. Thank you, Deepali.
So David, would you like to begin, and then maybe I can chime in a little bit as we go, and but we're more interested in your views. Thank you. Did we lose David? There he is.
No, he's here, but I'm not sure about, he's not able to mute.
David, you're on mute.
Master, you may need to make him co-host again.
Oh, I see. All right. Mike, perhaps you would like to start, and then we give it back to David when he's able.
Sure. Thank you for these important questions. You know, there's so many complexities associated with all our work on community level child protection, and community-led approaches are useful, and yet they too are subject to myriad complexities. So I think the questions are offered in a spirit of co-learning. One of the things that goes on, in, as David has indicated, between NGOs and communities is that oftentimes communities don't hold much power. And if we just simply open the door and say communities decide everything, it's all up to you, my experience is that the traditional power structures, the powers that be that David has identified, will tend to reinforce their elite status and their own power. In other words, the marginalized will remain marginalized. And so the facilitation process is intentionally designed to invite the views of children from the poorest of the poor families, children with disabilities, children who might be blind, children who are out of school, children who've been subjected to gender-based violence, and many other kinds of problems. And what tends to happen is that communities see the problems of children with new eyes. And then as the options for thinking through what are the main harms to children that we want to address, instead of leaving it up to the people in power, ask the girls, ask the boys. Don't leave out the religious leaders, they're terribly important. Don't leave out the teachers, but it's fundamentally a whole community approach. And in this approach, the facilitator maintains a stance of there's no right and wrong. It's a matter of thinking through what's in the best interests of our children. And in that process, what tends to happen is you get much greater inclusivity. David taught me a really stellar kind of approach for mitigating the influence of the existing power mechanisms. When we first went to a community, we met with the paramount chief, recognized and appreciated their authority and their influence, described what we wanted to do, which was to have ideas coming from all people to think about how to support children. And then David asked the chief, well, David, should the chief speak and guide people? And the chief said, no. If I speak up and say this is the issue we should address, no one's going to disagree with the paramount chief. And so he withdrew himself from the process directly and instead designated the chiefdom speaker as his designate to be present and simply observe and report back on the community discussions. So a good facilitator pays a lot of attention to the power dynamics and constantly works to bring forward different people's views. David, are you able to speak yet, or is your computer still having technical problems?
David, I have you here in 2 channels. Let me also make you co-host in the other one. Just a second. Yes, David, now you probably can unmute yourself in both channels. Can you try?
Okay, yes.
Yes, good. We hear you now. Wonderful.
Okay.
Were you able to follow the question, or should I repeat?
Please repeat, because I had a problem, which was why I tried to log in from my phone.
It's all right.
Okay.
David, the question is, one question is related to power dynamics inside of the community. When we are doing community-based approach, how to handle the inherent power dynamics that are part of the community that sometimes can actually be the cause of many challenges inside of the community. So dealing with community-based interventions, how do we avoid reinforcing those power mechanisms or structures that are actually leading to many of the issues? And second question is related to the culture. When the culture might be doing cultural practice, can also be related to some can be causing harm. So how to handle the cultural aspect without actually becoming as well a kind of intervening agenda. So those are the questions that has been posed by Deepali actually to the two of you.
Okay, so let me start with the power dynamics. It is important to learn from the community, who is who and who does what, and how they relate and how they make decisions. In many communities, especially in Africa, there is a traditional ruler who is sometimes assisted by some elders. But sometimes there are people who really influence decisions who are not rulers themselves, but who by their character or whatever means are able to force and make and influence decisions. It's important to know those people. It's also important to know the structures and that are in place within these communities. Is there a women's group within this community? What is the influence of this women's group? Is there a youth group in this community? What is the influence of the youth group? Are there religious leaders? What is the role of the religious leaders? Now, when we worked with communities to address the issue of teenage pregnancy, for example, the communities were divided into subgroups, traditional leaders and religious leaders in one group, male parents, female parents, male youth, female youth, male children, female children, etc. When they had discussed the interventions in the subgroup stage, and they came together to now discuss and agree on these interventions, one of the interventions that have come from women is the introduction of contraceptives within the community, and to make contraceptive supplies available in the peripheral health units within that community. The men had quickly said, no, we cannot allow the introduction of contraceptives, because if you bring in contraceptives, then the women are now going to become promiscuous, and we do not have a way of catching them, because they will not become pregnant. If you introduce the use of condoms, then you are now giving license to the girls and to the boys, to just have relationships with people within the community. So the male adults said, no, we cannot accept this. Now, what happened was they then went to, in these communities, there are people who are very influential. When they speak, people listen to them. So they brought such a person who explained the importance of the use of contraceptives, because the women said, let us face reality. Yeah. Our girls are sexually active, and this is not going to change. So let us not fool ourselves and say we can get everyone to abstain. If they are sexually active, then we have to accept this and help them protect themselves from unwanted pregnancies. So once this person was brought in, this person was able to explain, and then the men calmed down and they ended up accepting. Now, so this person is not part of the traditional rulers committee. This person, is not the mommy queen. This person is not the youth leader, but this person has immense power. This person has immense authority, and they are able to make and change decisions because of whatever experiences that they have. Also, if you go to a community and there are people you ignore, these are the people who will undermine the work that you will do, and then they will fight you. When you have a general meeting, they are the people who are going to ask those embarrassing questions that you're not going to answer. They are the people who are going to bring up the lies that other people will believe. They will tell their community, oh, don't mind this person. Government has given so much money, or the UN has given so much money, or the international community has given so much money, and they don't want to bring it. That is because this person feels slighted. This person feels you have not recognized them and you have not engaged them in discussions. So they fight you openly, and they try to undermine the work that you do. So this is why it is important to know who plays what role, and try to engage them and use their strengths, to support the work that you do. There are people who are on every committee. We call them general secretaries. You call this committee, they say, oh, I'm the secretary. You call this other committee, they say, no, I'm the secretary. If you ignore people like this, you are going to fail, because people like this are the ones who are going to fight you. So you bring them on board and you work with them in a way that harnesses all of your strengths. Sometimes you tell them, okay, so you are going to be the chair of this meeting. And when this person is the chair of the meeting, you have a very good meeting, you know? So if you do not know their roles and you do not enlist them, then you are going to end up fighting with them. The question about cultural practices that may affect children. This is a very good question, because when you engage communities and you talk about protection issues, they will sometimes not talk about those cultural practices that are harmful to children. Many communities will not identify FGM as a main harm to children. They may not identify child marriage as a main harm to children. They will talk about children dropping out of school. They will talk about maltreatment of children. They will talk about, orphans, etc. But they will not talk about these harmful practices, because these harmful practices are cultural practices which have been part of the community, which has defined this community over time. But when you engage and talk to them in small groups, when you engage and try to learn why these practices are in place, what these practices are expected to do, and how these practices are expected to protect children, and you start talking about how these practices actually harm children, then the community opens up and starts talking about them. When we did the ethnographic study, harmful practices were not at the very top of the issues affecting children. But when we came to talk about, what the community needs to do to address some of the child protection problems, people started raising up these harmful practices and connecting the dots. FGM, for example, is difficult to talk about, but then FGM has a very strong link to child marriage and to teen pregnancy. And so when the community identified teenage pregnancy as a huge problem, and then the facilitators encouraged them to understand and identify the factors responsible for teen pregnancy, the issue of FGM came up, and they slowly started identifying FGM as a factor that promotes teenage pregnancy and child marriage. So when you have good facilitation skills and you ask the questions, the critical questions about the issues that are not being discussed, the community slowly starts coming up with them. When you have a good facilitator who then, helps the community to link the issues that they want to talk about and the factors causing these issues, then the harmful practices, the harmful traditional practices start coming out and people start seeing them as problems. When you talk about children dropping out of schools and you discuss the factors responsible for this, then FGM becomes one of the factors. And then the community sees, we have not seen FGM, as a problem, but now we see FGM as a problem because, in our analysis, we have seen how it contributes to our girls dropping out of school. And we have seen the impact of girls dropping out of school on our families, on our communities, and society in whole. But the important thing is the close collaboration, the discussions, the learning, and most importantly, putting people into small groups where they feel comfortable to be able to bring out these issues, which they will normally not bring out in larger issues, in larger communities or in larger meetings.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. And I must now do the very hard part, which is I wish we could stay for at least another half an hour, especially to be addressing so many questions that are coming up. So important. There are a number of questions related to gender-based violence, sexual violence as well. But I must thank you, the two of you, for this time, for this opportunity, for being with us here today. I want to thank all the participants for joining this event today as well. This has been recorded and will be made available at MHPSS.net YouTube channel shortly. And I wanted to invite everyone for joining our community of practice at MHPSS.net on community-based interventions. And we have here as well a pool that I'll ask my colleagues to be showing for us. And that's always help us to to improve and to also evaluate and monitor the webinar series we have been doing. And while we are doing the pool, I just want to give you the final words, David and Mike. The concluding remarks as well.
You first, David.
Okay. It's a pity we usually do not have more time for these discussions, and some of the important issues we talk about very quickly. But community-led child protection is very potent. It's the way we should be doing our work, and it is the answer to all of the complex problems that we have. With MHPSS, we can only help people recover and rehabilitate from their experiences when we start from what is acceptable to them, when we start from what is acceptable to the community, because it is usually the interaction with the people around you, that helps with your recovery. And we have seen this to be very effective. Sierra Leone is a good case study of how we were able to address the problems of child soldiers and help with their integration. And it was through the community-based programs that we helped so many children recover from the experiences and trauma of war. In Sri Lanka, as I said, using very effective, simple methods of working with communities to address the issues that we are closest to their hearts, was able to prepare them for other interventions and helping them to move beyond the impacts of the tsunami. Community-led interventions are sustainable. They may not require as much resources as the other interventions that we use, because you are relying more on and using resources at community level, and there is increased sustainability because there is ownership. It is very important that we try to understand as best as possible and promote community-led interventions in the work that we do, because development starts with the people. It starts with the people who are affected. It's about the affected people making the decisions, and that is what community-led child protection is about, helping the people who are affected to make the decisions on how they want to see their development. Our role is to facilitate, our role is to guide, our role is to provide information, and our role is to link them to resources that they may need that are not available within their communities. I want to thank this network for the important work that is being done, for the webinar that has been organized, for the contributions of all of the different people. Let's stay in touch. I will try to register with the network as well. There's so much we can learn from each other and share as we go along. Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much to every other person who has participated, especially to you, Marcio, for being in the pilot seat and organizing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, David. I just wanted to underline what you said about, putting things in the hands of the people. Let's put community-based psychosocial support in the hands of the people. Listen to, learn from them, walk alongside them, and build more effective MHPSS as we go. Thanks hugely for all your insights, David, and thanks, Marcio, for hosting us. And most of all, thanks to all the participants and for raising all the incredible questions that are there. This shows that we need to have more spaces for dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And stay tuned. This series will continue. Thank you very much.